A thug tries to punch an elderly veteran who defended a royal guard's honor. He thought he was attacking a frail old man. He didn't know that the veteran was a disguised Steven Seagal, who was about to teach him respect. The London air was crisp, carrying the faint, metallic scent of rain and the distant hum of city life. Before the grand, imposing gates of Buckingham Palace, a timeless ritual unfolded. A royal guard stood at his post, a living statue of crimson and black. His iconic bearskin had a towering symbol of centuries of tradition. He was motionless, a pillar of discipline amidst the swirling tide of tourists who ebbed and flowed around him. His gaze was fixed forward, seeing nothing and everything, his stillness a testament to a level of mental and physical control most people could never comprehend. Among the respectful crowd stood Steven Seagal. He was dressed not as a celebrity, but as a seasoned traveler, a man of the world. A dark, high-quality peacoat was buttoned against the chill, and a simple cashmere scarf was wrapped around his neck. His salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed, his signature ponytail tight and severe. He watched the guard not with the fleeting curiosity of a tourist, but with the deep, knowing respect of a fellow practitioner of discipline. He understood what it took to achieve that level of stillness, that absolute mastery over one's own impulses. In the guard's rigid posture, Seagal saw not an antiquated ceremony, but the living embodiment of Budo, the martial way. It was a commitment to form, a surrender of ego to duty, a strength that was profound precisely because it was silent. He watched, content in the shared, unspoken understanding of a warrior's spirit. This pocket of dignified silence was torn apart by a voice laced with arrogance and cheap beer. "Would you look at this bloody tin soldier?" A man named Declan shoved his way through the crowd, his two lanky friends trailing in his wake like hyenas. Declan was a man built of brutish confidence, a thick neck, a belligerent jaw, and the restless, angry eyes of someone who saw the world as a series of things to conquer or break. He wore a loud, branded football jersey, his knuckles were tattooed, and he moved with a swagger that was meant to intimidate. He stopped directly in front of the motionless royal guard, far closer than was respectful. "Oi, you! In the fuzzy hat!" Declan sneered, his voice loud enough to make nearby tourists flinch and turn. "You deaf, or just stupid? I'm talking to you." The guard, of course, did not react. His duty was to remain impassive, a living symbol of the crown's dignity. Declan laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "See? Nothing. Just an empty suit. A mannequin. My old lady's garden gnome has more life in it." He began to circle the guard like a predator. "What's the point of you, eh? You think some bloke with a knife is gonna be scared off by your big, fluffy hat?" Seagal, watching from 20 feet away, felt a familiar, cold stillness settle over him. He had seen men like Declan all over the world. They were weak men who mistook their own noise for strength, who could only feel big by making others feel small. And they were always drawn, like moths to a flame, to targets they perceived as unable or unwilling to fight back. Declan had chosen his target, and Seagal knew, with a grim certainty, that this would not end with just words. Declan's performance grew bolder as the guard's stoicism continued to deny him the reaction he craved. He needed to escalate, to force a crack in the soldier's impenetrable discipline. He leaned in close, his face inches from the guard's, his breath foul. "I bet you ain't even got bullets in that thing," Declan taunted, gesturing to the guard's ceremonial rifle. "It's all a show, isn't it? A big, fancy game of make-believe for the tourists." He then did something that made the crowd gasp collectively. He reached out and jabbed a thick finger hard into the center of the guard's chest, right on the polished brass buttons of his tunic. "Huh? You feel that, mate? Or are you just dead inside?" The guard remained a statue of red and black. His eyes didn't even flicker. But a muscle in his jaw, almost imperceptible, tightened. It was the only sign of the immense restraint he was exercising. The crowd grew more agitated. "Leave him alone," a woman shouted. "Show some respect," another man added. Declan spun around, a wild, manic grin on his face. Respect? For this? He's a prop. He's paid to stand here and take it. It's his job. He turned back to the guard, his glee turning venomous. And I'm just getting started. He raised his hand again, this time aiming to knock the bearskin hat off the soldier's head. It was a calculated act of ultimate disrespect, an attempt to strip the man of the very symbol of his duty. Before Declan's hand could make contact, a new voice cut through the air. It was not loud, but it carried a weight and a calm authority that made everyone, including Declan, freeze and turn. That's enough. Steven Seagal had stepped away from the crowd. He walked forward slowly, his hands in the pockets of his dark pea coat, his presence a sudden, sobering force. Declan squinted, his mind momentarily thrown off balance. And who the hell are you? His granddad? Seagal stopped a few feet away, positioning himself slightly between Declan and the guard. He looked at Declan, his eyes unreadable behind his tinted glasses. The man you are harassing is a serving soldier of the crown, on duty, Seagal stated, his voice even and precise. He is a symbol of this country's honor. The fact that you don't understand that is your problem. The fact that you are physically assaulting him is about to become mine. The directness and unexpected eloquence of the response stunned Declan into a brief silence. His friends shifted uneasily behind him. This ain't got nothing to do with you, old man, Declan finally spat, trying to regain his footing. You made it my business when you laid your hands on a soldier, Seagal replied, his voice dropping slightly, becoming colder. That uniform, that post, it represents a discipline you can't even begin to comprehend. What you see as weakness is a strength you will never possess. Now, walk away. It was a clear, direct command. It was also a final chance. A line had been drawn in the courtyard, not by the guards, but by the quiet old man with the salt and pepper beard and the eyes that held the stillness of a frozen lake. For a man like Declan, being spoken to with such calm, dismissive authority by an old man was more infuriating than any shout or threat. His world was built on a simple hierarchy of physical intimidation. He looked at Seagal, the age, the refined coat, the quiet demeanor, and saw a new, softer target. His frustration with the immovable guard now had a new outlet. You think you're better than me? Declan sneered, taking a menacing step towards Seagal, fully turning his back on the royal guard. Coming over here with your big words, defending this toy soldier. You don't know me. You don't know what I'm capable of. I know exactly what you are, Seagal replied, his voice flat. You're a bully. And bullies are cowards. You only pick fights you think you can win. The truth of the statement hit Declan like a physical blow. His face contorted in rage. This was it. This was the trigger. He had been publicly challenged, his alpha status questioned by someone he perceived as infinitely weaker. A coward, am I? He roared, his voice echoing across the now silent plaza. I'll show you a coward, you old bastard. The crowd, sensing the imminent explosion of violence, surged backward. People fumbled for their phones, their nervous excitement replaced by genuine alarm. Declan's friends, seeing the look in his eyes, hesitated for a moment, then took a step back themselves, wanting no part of what was to come. Declan bounced on the balls of his feet, rolling his thick shoulders and clenching his tattooed fists. He was a street fighter, used to ending confrontations with a single, brutal punch. He saw Seagal standing there, hands still in his pockets, posture relaxed, and mistook his calm for fear, his stillness for paralysis. It was the last mistake he would ever make. He was about to learn that some men don't need to adopt a fighting stance because they are always in one. The air grew thick and heavy, the moment stretching into a taut, unbearable silence before the snap. I'm going to teach you to respect your betters, old man. Declan shouted, and launched his attack. He threw a powerful, looping right hook, a brawler's punch designed to knock a man out cold. It was fast, strong, and loaded with all of his frustrated rage. He aimed for Seagal's jaw, putting his entire body weight behind the blow. The crowd gasped. A woman screamed. From Seagal's perspective, the world slowed down. It was a state of heightened awareness he had honed over 50 years of martial practice, a place where time itself seemed to bend to his will. He saw the punch coming not as a single, fast object, but as a sequence of events. He saw the telegraph in Declan's shoulder tensing. He saw the slight shift of weight to his back foot. He saw the arc of the fist as it began its journey, wide and inefficient. He saw the anger in Declan's eyes, an emotion that made him powerful but also predictable and blind. He could have dodged it. He could have blocked it. He could have met it with a devastating counterstrike. But he chose to do none of those things. He chose to make a different point. As the fist, a blur of motion to everyone else, approached his face, Seagal moved. But he didn't move away. He moved forward. In the fraction of a second before Declan's knuckles would have connected with his jaw, Seagal's left hand came up from his coat pocket. It moved with an impossible, fluid speed, not to block the punch, but to meet it. His open palm intercepted Declan's fist mid-flight, a few inches from his face. It wasn't a slap or a parry, it was an absorption. The crowd heard a dull, wet thud, but there was no sign of impact on Seagal. He had caught the punch. Declan's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. It was like punching a wall of solid granite that had reached out and grabbed him. His forward momentum was completely, utterly, stopped. At the same instant, Seagal's right hand emerged from his other pocket. It shot out and clamped onto Declan's wrist. It was not a grab of desperation, but of absolute control. With both the fist and wrist now secured, Seagal had complete dominion over Declan's entire arm, and by extension, his balance and his will. "You lead with anger," Seagal said, his voice a low, instructional whisper that only Declan could hear. "That makes your power easy to borrow." With a subtle, almost imperceptible twist of his hips and a downward, spiraling motion of his hands, Seagal applied a classic Aikido kotegeshi, the wrist return. He wasn't using his own strength, he was using Declan's overcommit lunge, turning the thug's own power back on him through the fulcrum of his joints. A raw, guttural scream of agony was ripped from Declan's throat as an electric, unbearable pain shot up his arm. His knees buckled instantly, his body forced to follow the direction of the lock to avoid his wrist being snapped in two. Seagal guided him, not through him, down to the stone pavement. Declan landed hard on his knees, his head bowed, his arm trapped in an iron, inescapable grip. The entire confrontation, from punch to submission, had lasted less than 2 seconds. Seagal held him there for a moment, the silence of the plaza now absolute, broken only by Declan's ragged, pained gasps. He had not struck the man. He had not kicked him. He had simply taken his violence and handed it back to him. He looked down at the defeated thug, his expression holding no pleasure, no anger, only a profound, almost weary disappointment. "Respect," he said calmly, "is not something you demand. And it is not something you take. It is something you give, in order to receive." He released his grip. Declan collapsed forward, cradling his wrist, his face a mask of sweat, tears, and utter humiliation. He was a bully who had just been systematically and philosophically dismantled in front of hundreds of people and dozens of recording phones. The crowd stood in stunned silence. They had just witnessed something incredible, a display of martial artistry so profound, so efficient, that it seemed to defy reality. It was violence, yet it was also a form of grace. It was a lesson, delivered with brutal, undeniable clarity. The quiet, bold man had revealed himself to be a master of a level they couldn't comprehend. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been inverted with the quiet finality of a closing fist. The sound of approaching sirens finally broke the spell. Palace security, followed by Metropolitan Police, arrived on the scene, drawn by the calls of multiple concerned tourists. They moved in quickly, their faces grim and professional, creating a cordon around the scene. They saw Declan on the ground, sobbing in pain and shame. They saw the scattered onlookers, their phones still out but their expressions now ones of awe rather than fear. And they saw Steven Seagal, standing calmly, his hands once again in his pockets, looking as if he were merely waiting for a bus. "Sir, what happened here?" a police sergeant asked, approaching Seagal cautiously. "This man," Seagal said, nodding his head towards the pathetic figure of Declan, "was publicly harassing one of your on-duty soldiers. When I asked him to stop, he attempted to assault me. I defended myself." The sergeant looked at the size difference between Declan and Seagal, then at Declan, who was being helped to his feet by two officers, still cradling his wrist. "I see," the sergeant said, his tone suggesting he did, in fact, see a great deal. Several witnesses immediately came forward, all offering their phone footage, all corroborating the same story. The thug had provoked, the old man had defended the guard, and the thug had thrown the first and only punch. Declan, now in handcuffs, was led away, his face hidden in shame. He didn't protest. He had no fight left in him. As the police were clearing the scene and the crowd began to slowly disperse, a quiet, significant moment occurred, noticed by almost no one but Seagal himself. He turned his gaze one last time toward the royal guard at his post. The soldier was still there, at perfect attention, his gaze fixed forward, as if nothing had happened. His uniform was immaculate, his posture unyielding. He had not moved, had not flinched, had not broken protocol, even when a fistfight had erupted just feet from him. He had maintained his discipline, trusting that the situation would be handled. Seagal looked at him, and in that moment, there was a profound, unspoken communication between two men from different worlds, but of the same warrior spirit. They both understood discipline. They both understood control. They both understood the immense strength required to remain still in the face of chaos. As Seagal held his gaze, the royal guard, without turning his head, without breaking his formal posture, performed an almost imperceptible action. His eyes shifted for a fraction of a second to meet Seagal's, and he gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. It was a minute gesture, so small that anyone else would have missed it. But it was not for anyone else. It was a silent message from one disciplined man to another: "I saw what you did. I understand. Respect." Seagal returned the nod, just as subtly. It was a shared moment of acknowledgement, a quiet conclusion to a loud conflict. The lesson had not only been taught to the bully, but had been witnessed and honored by the very symbol of discipline he had sought to defend. By evening, the videos had circled the globe. "Tourist takes down Buckingham Palace bully, mysterious old man schools thug," the headlines screamed. But it was the raw, unedited phone footage that told the real story. Viewers marveled not at the violence, but at the lack of it. They were mesmerized by Seagal's calm, his economy of motion, the way he had dismantled a larger, younger, aggressive man with what looked like minimal effort. Martial arts forums exploded with analysis. Experts identified the techniques, kotegeshi, iriminage, and praised the perfect execution. They spoke of the deep Budo principles on display: non-resistance, using an attacker's energy against them, and the moral imperative to use just enough force to neutralize a threat, and no more. The story of the old veteran who defended the guard's honor became a global lesson in the difference between street brawling and true martial artistry. Declan, the thug, became an unwilling internet celebrity, a poster child for what happens when arrogance meets quiet competence. His attempt to create a viral moment of his own making had succeeded, just not in the way he had ever imagined. Steven Seagal was already gone, having slipped away from the scene before any reporters could identify him. He sat in a quiet tea house in a different part of London, a simple cup of steaming green tea in his hands. He looked out the window at the bustling city, his thoughts calm. He wasn't thinking about the fight. The fight was irrelevant, a brief, ugly necessity. He was thinking about the two soldiers. The one on duty, a young man embodying centuries of discipline, who had stood his ground without flinching. And the other one, Declan, a man whose own military service had seemingly taught him nothing about honor, and had instead left him with a festering anger he now inflicted on the world. He thought about the nature of strength. The world was full of men like Declan, men who equated power with noise, with aggression, with the ability to dominate others. They were loud, and they often got their way through intimidation. But they were brittle. Their strength, lacking a philosophical center, was easily broken. True strength, he reflected, was quieter. It was in the royal guard's unyielding stillness. It was in the discipline to absorb an insult without reacting. It was in the wisdom to use force not to punish, but only to protect. It was the ability to walk away, to return to a state of peace, leaving the chaos of another man's ego behind. He took a slow sip of his tea. The lesson he had taught in the plaza was not for Declan alone. It was a reminder for himself, and for anyone watching, that the ultimate victory is not winning the fight, but maintaining one's own unshakable peace. This story is a powerful reminder that the most formidable strength is often the quietest. Steven Seagal defended a symbol of honor not with rage, but with a lifetime of discipline, proving that true martial arts is about restoring balance, not creating chaos. Have you ever witnessed a situation where calm and skill completely overcame brute force and aggression? Share your story in the comments below. Show your respect for the quiet warriors who stand for discipline and honor. If this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe for more powerful tales of justice.